Before mankind ever built cities, before kings ruled nations, before the first ship ever crossed the sea, the universe itself lived under fear. Not human fear, divine fear, because the sky was alive. The Greeks believed the heavens were not empty space, but the body of a god named Uranus. Every storm was his anger. Every dark cloud carried his mood. Every night sky, filled with stars, was part of his endless form stretched across the world. And beneath him suffered Gaia, the earth itself. The mountains were her bones. Rivers were her veins. Forests were the breath of her body. She was the mother of creation, the one who gave birth to the Titans, the Cyclopes, and creatures so ancient that later civilizations would try to erase them from memory. But Uranus feared many of his own children. He saw their strength. He saw what they could become. And like many rulers terrified of losing power, he chose cruelty over trust. He imprisoned them deep beneath the earth, buried alive inside Gaia herself. Imagine that pain. The monsters trapped beneath the world screamed endlessly in darkness. Their movements caused earthquakes. Volcanoes erupted because Gaia could no longer contain the agony inside her own body. The oceans trembled. Storms became violent without warning. The world itself was suffering. For ages, Gaia endured it silently. But even primordial gods eventually break. And one day, the earth decided the sky had to fall. Gaia secretly approached her children one by one. She asked Oceanus to rise against Uranus. He refused. She went to Hyperion. He lowered his eyes in fear. Even mighty titans trembled at the thought of challenging the ruler of the heavens. Only one listened carefully. Kronos, the youngest titan, cold, patient, silent in a way that made even immortals uncomfortable. Kronos understood something dangerous about power. No ruler estás untouchable forever. Gaia took him deep beneath the roots of the world where no sunlight had ever reached. There, hidden in darkness older than creation itself, she revealed the weapon she had forged in secret. A sickle made from divine adamant. Its blade shimmered with silver light sharp enough to cut through destiny itself. When Uranus descends, Gaia whispered, "You must not hesitate." Kronos took the weapon, and somewhere across the world, the oceans began rising violently against their shores, as if nature itself already sensed what was coming. That night felt wrong. The wind stopped completely. Animals hid. The stars disappeared behind black clouds. Then Uranus descended from the heavens once more to cover the earth. Confident, untouchable, completely unaware that his own sun waited hidden in darkness below him. Kronos did not hesitate. The strike came fast, brutal, one single motion. Then the universe exploded with the scream of Uranus. It was not simply sound. It was terror. Mountains cracked apart. Seas rose like walls. Lightning ripped across the sky endlessly. The cry echoed through creation itself. And with that violent act, Kronos severed his father and hurled the flesh far into the sea. Blood rained upon the earth. Ancient Greeks believed terrible spirits were born from those drops, creatures of vengeance and fury. But far out upon the waters, something stranger was happening. The severed divine flesh did not sink. It floated, and where it touched the ocean, the sea itself began to transform. Foam spread across the surface, glowing with impossible light. Not ordinary foam. This shimmered silver and gold beneath the darkness like moonlight trapped inside pearls. The ocean churned violently around it. Fish fled into the depths. Whales vanished beneath black waters. Even the winds stopped moving. The sea did not understand what it was carrying. Days passed, or maybe centuries. Time moved differently in those first ages. The glowing foam drifted slowly across the Mediterranean while the world watched in silence. At night, it illuminated entire coastlines. The waters around it became calm and reflective like polished glass. Everywhere the foam traveled, strange things happened. Flowers bloomed from dry stone. The air became warm and sweet. Creatures that normally hunted one another stood peacefully beside the water. Something was being born. Not just a goddess. A force. The glowing foam finally approached the island of Cyprus. And the island reacted before she even appeared. Barren cliffs suddenly bloomed green with vines. The sea became calm. Waves rolled gently against the shore as if bowing before royalty. Near the rocky coastline of Paphos, the glowing mass slowly began rising from the sea. A shape formed within the light. First came golden hair flowing like liquid sunlight over water. Then shoulders, arms, the outline of a woman so beautiful the air itself seemed to shimmer around her. Then Aphrodite stepped onto the shore, fully formed, fully divine. And the moment her feet touched the earth, the world changed. Birds erupted into song. Flowers burst from stone. The ocean became completely still. Ancient poets would later say the waves kissed her feet. Standing beneath the dawn sky, Aphrodite looked less like a goddess entering the world and more like beauty itself, taking physical form for the first time. Her skin glowed softly like pearls hidden beneath deep water. Her eyes reflected the sea. Her golden hair moved in the wind like threads of sunlight. Every movement carried impossible grace. But beneath all that beauty existed something dangerous. Because Aphrodite had not been born from peace. She had risen from violence, from blood, from destruction. And deep inside her existed the truth that love itself can wound more deeply than war. The Ori arrived first, ancient goddesses of the seasons. They stepped from morning mist carrying robes woven from divine fabric colored like sunset and dawn. Without speaking, they dressed Aphrodite in garments softer than clouds. Then came the Graces laughing beside her, placing flowers in her golden hair and decorating her with shining jewels. Wherever Aphrodite walked, life followed. Grass spread beneath her footsteps. Trees bent gently toward her. The air itself became warm and fragrant. Even centuries later, people living near Paphos claimed the sea there still shimmered differently at sunset because the waters remembered the birth of the goddess. News spread quickly across the divine world. The gods became obsessed. Apollo stopped singing when he first saw her. Hermes suddenly found endless excuses to visit Cyprus. Poseidon sent treasures from the ocean floor, hoping to impress her. Even Zeus watched carefully, because he understood something the others did not. Aphrodite was not simply beautiful. She was dangerous. The Greeks never saw love as weak. They feared it, because no force destroys human judgment faster than desire. A king can command armies. A philosopher can master wisdom. A warrior can conquer nations. But all of them can still be destroyed by longing. That was Aphrodite's true power. The obsession that keeps people awake at night. The desire that ruins reason. The attraction powerful enough to start wars. Olympus itself began changing after her arrival. Whenever Aphrodite entered a room, conversations stopped. Music softened. Eyes followed her. Apollo praised her beauty in poetry. Hermes flirted nervously whenever she spoke. Even Ares, the brutal god of war, fell silent in her presence. And that silence mattered, because Ares was not a god who fell silent for anyone. The war god watched Aphrodite from a distance at first. Unlike Apollo, he did not sing songs. Unlike Hermes, he did not joke. Ares desired things directly, violently. He was battle-made flesh, massive, scarred, terrifying. The sound of his bronze armor alone could spread panic through armies before battle even began. Yet when Aphrodite walked through Olympus, the god of war stared at her like a starving man watching a feast beyond reach. Others noticed, especially Zeus. The king of the gods understood danger before it fully appeared. Rivalries among immortals never stayed small for long. Gods did not merely argue. They caused disasters, storms, earthquakes, wars. And if multiple Olympians openly fought for Aphrodite, Olympus itself could fracture apart. So Zeus began searching for a solution. Far beneath volcanic mountains, another god worked endlessly beside rivers of molten fire. Hephaestus, master smith of Olympus. His forge thundered day and night beneath smoking peaks, while Cyclopes hammered metal beside him. He created impossible wonders. Golden servants capable of movement. Weapons for the gods. Palaces brighter than mortal imagination. Even Zeus's thunderbolts came from his forge. Yet despite his genius, Hephaestus remained isolated. Years earlier, he had been thrown from Olympus during divine conflict. The fall shattered his leg forever. He walked with a limp. His body carried scars from impact and fire. Compared to the perfect beauty of the other gods, Hephaestus appeared rough and broken. But Zeus saw opportunity. If Aphrodite married Hephaestus, several problems vanished at once. The loyal smith would be rewarded. The rivalries among the gods would calm. And Aphrodite, the most dangerously desirable being in existence, would become tied to a husband unlikely to threaten Zeus's authority. It was a perfect political arrangement, except for one thing. Love cannot be controlled, not even by the king of the gods. The wedding shocked Olympus. Hephaestus arrived wearing magnificent robes woven with gold, though traces of ash still marked his skin from the forge. Then Aphrodite entered. An entire hall fell silent. Her gown shimmered like sunlight across calm water. Flowers in her golden hair bloomed brighter whenever she moved. The contrast between bride and groom felt almost unreal. Beauty beside smoke, grace beside iron, desire beside labor. Some gods pitted Hephaestus. Others envied him. But Ares watched everything without expression. And inside him, something dangerous had already begun growing. The marriage solved nothing. If anything, it made Olympus more unstable. Because Hephaestus truly loved Aphrodite. That was the tragedy. He created extraordinary gifts for her. Mirrors reflecting perfect beauty, necklaces glowing with captured starlight, perfume stored inside bottles that never emptied. But he did not understand her. His world was metal, fire, and endless labor. Hers was music, movement, celebration, passion. While Hephaestus spent endless hours inside volcanic workshops, Aphrodite wandered through golden halls surrounded by admirers. And eventually her eyes began turning toward Ares. The attraction between them terrified even the gods. Because together they represented two forces humanity has never escaped: love and war. The Greeks understood something most civilizations tried to ignore. The line between passion and destruction is very thin. Wars begin over desire. Jealousy kills. Longing drives people mad. And nowhere would that truth become more dangerous than in the affair slowly beginning between Aphrodite and the god of war. At first it was only glances, then conversations during feasts, then secret meetings beneath moonlit skies while Olympus slept. Ares spoke to Aphrodite differently from the others. He did not worship her from a distance. He challenged her. The war god spoke openly about violence, fear, conquest, and bloodshed, while every other deity desperately tried to impress her with beauty and poetry. And strangely, Aphrodite listened, because beneath her radiant appearance lived someone born from cosmic violence. She understood destruction better than anyone realized. The affair had not fully begun yet, but fate was already moving toward it. And when Aphrodite and Ares finally came together, their love would shake Olympus itself. Olympus never truly slept. Mortals imagined the home of the gods as peaceful, golden halls above the clouds where mortals spent eternity celebrating without worry or conflict. But the truth was far more dangerous. Olympus was a kingdom built from ambition, jealousy, pride, desire, and power. Every god carried old grudges. Every feast hid silent rivalries beneath laughter. And after Aphrodite arrived, those tensions only grew worse. The palace of the gods stood high above the world where mortal storms could never reach. Massive columns carved from shining marble reflected eternal sunlight. Rivers of nectar flowed through silver fountains. Music echoed endlessly through open halls while immortal servants moved like shadows carrying goblets filled with divine wine. Yet despite all its beauty, Olympus constantly felt unstable. Because every immortal there understood one terrifying truth. The gods were powerful enough to destroy the world whenever emotion overcame reason. And no emotion overwhelmed reason faster than desire. Aphrodite became the center of everything almost immediately. No matter where she walked, attention followed. When she crossed the great halls of Olympus, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Gods forgot what they were saying. Musicians lost rhythm. Even the air itself seemed warmer around her. But the reactions differed depending on who watched her. Apollo admired her like a poet staring at the sunrise. Hermes flirted endlessly, hiding nervousness beneath humor. Poseidon desired her with the deep possessiveness of the sea itself. But Ares watched her differently. The god of war did not look at Aphrodite with softness. He looked at her with hunger. And Aphrodite noticed. At first she ignored it, or at least pretended to. She understood what happened whenever people looked at her. Mortals abandoned kingdoms for love. Kings started wars over beauty. Men betrayed brothers. Women destroyed entire dynasties through passion and jealousy. Desire followed her naturally. But Ares felt different from the others. There was no poetry in him. No performance. No desperate attempt to impress her. Ares did not sing. He did not flatter. He did not kneel before beauty. The god of war simply wanted. Directly. Honestly. Violently. And strangely, that honesty fascinated Aphrodite. One evening during a feast celebrating a military victory among mortal kingdoms, the tension between them became impossible to ignore. The hall blazed with torchlight. Golden cups overflowed with wine. Music echoed across marble walls while gods and goddesses laughed loudly beneath drifting clouds of incense. Ares sat near the far end of the table, still wearing pieces of bronze armor, dusted with ash from recent battlefields. Even seated, he looked dangerous. Scars crossed his arms and shoulders like marks carved into stone. His massive frame radiated raw strength in a way completely opposite to Apollo's polished elegance or Hermes' effortless charm. Aphrodite felt his eyes on her throughout the entire feast. Not constantly. That would have been easy to dismiss. Instead, he watched her occasionally, silently, with the patience of a predator. And for reasons she could not fully explain, she found herself watching him in return. Zeus noticed. Of course he noticed. Nothing dangerous escaped the king of the gods for long. From his throne at the center of Olympus, Zeus studied the growing tension carefully while pretending to focus on the celebration around him. He had arranged Aphrodite's marriage to Hephaestus specifically to prevent this kind of disaster. Because if love and war ever truly united, the consequences could become catastrophic. Ares was already one of the most unstable Olympians. Unlike Athena, who represented disciplined strategy and calculated warfare, Ares embodied violence itself. Bloodlust, chaos, the madness of battle. Entire cities burned when he lost control. Entire nations vanished beneath wars he inspired. And Aphrodite possessed the power to override reason itself. Together, they represented a combination even Zeus found dangerous. Meanwhile, Hephaestus remained completely unaware. Far beneath volcanic mountains, the divine smith worked endlessly beside rivers of molten metal while sparks exploded around him like tiny stars. The forge never rested. Neither did he. Hammer strikes echoed through massive caverns where Cyclopes labored beside roaring furnaces hot enough to melt divine metals. Rivers of bronze flowed through carved stone channels glowing brighter than sunlight. Hephaestus buried himself in work because work made sense. Metal obeyed rules. Fire obeyed rules. Craftsmanship rewarded patience and precision. Emotions did not. Relationships did not. And though he genuinely loved Aphrodite, there were moments when even he sensed the distance growing between them. She visited the forge less often now. When she did come, she looked uncomfortable among the smoke and heat. Her beauty seemed almost unnatural inside the harsh, industrial glow of the workshops. Still, Hephaestus tried. He created gifts, constantly hoping they might bridge the gap between them. Golden birds capable of singing without rest. Jewelry glowing softly beneath moonlight. Mirrors that reflected not appearance, but inner beauty. Yet every masterpiece only seemed to push Aphrodite further away. Not because she hated him. That would have been simpler. The tragedy was that Aphrodite pitied him. And pity is poison inside a marriage, especially for a goddess born from desire itself. One night, Aphrodite wandered alone through the gardens of Olympus, unable to sleep. Moonlight spilled across marble paths, lined with roses and myrtle trees sacred to her worship. Warm wind carried distant music from ongoing feasts somewhere deeper inside the palace. Then she heard footsteps behind her. Heavy, confident. Ares, the war god, approached slowly, wearing dark armor, reflecting silver beneath the moonlight. No helmet covered his face tonight. His expression looked calm in a way few beings ever witnessed. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence itself felt dangerous. Finally, Ares broke it. Do you ever get tired of being worshipped? The question surprised her. Most gods spoke to Aphrodite about beauty, love, desire. No one asked whether she grew exhausted by it. She smiled faintly. Do you ever get tired of war? Ares laughed softly. Constantly. That answer surprised her even more. The god of war stepped closer. You know what mortals misunderstand about battle? He asked quietly. They think warriors fight because they love violence. And why do they fight? Aphrodite asked. Because they love something enough to kill for it. The words settled heavily between them. And in that moment, Aphrodite understood something terrifying. Ares was not simply the god of slaughter. He was the god of passion pushed beyond reason. The same force that made lovers abandon logic also made soldiers charge into impossible battles. Love and war were not opposites. They were reflections of one another. After that night, their meetings became frequent, always accidental at first. Conversations during feasts, passing encounters along palace corridors, moments beside fountains overlooking the mortal world below. But slowly those encounters turned intentional. Aphrodite found herself searching for him unconsciously. And Ares, normally impatient in all things, showed remarkable restraint. He never rushed her, never pressured her. That patience made him even more dangerous. The other gods began noticing changes. Apollo watched silently as Aphrodite laughed more freely around Ares than anyone else. Hermes started making nervous jokes whenever the two stood too close together. Even Hera sensed the tension growing inside Olympus. Only Hephaestus remained blind, or perhaps he simply refused to see it. Then came the festival on Mount Ida. The celebration honored Zeus' ancient victory over the Titans. Gods, nymphs, and spirits gathered beneath torchlight while music echoed through forests stretching across the mountainside. Wine flowed endlessly. Dancing lasted through the night. And beneath the chaos of celebration, Aphrodite and Ares finally crossed the line neither could uncross. It began with a look. A long look. The kind that says everything words cannot. Aphrodite slipped away from the celebration, first moving silently through moonlit trees while distant music faded behind her. Ares followed moments later. No one stopped them. No one dared. Deep within the forest stood a hidden clearing sacred to Aphrodite. Streams of silver water flowed between flowering trees while fireflies drifted through warm night air like living stars. The moment Ares stepped into the clearing, the atmosphere changed completely. No more pretending. No more restraint. For a long time, they simply stood facing one another. The goddess of love. The god of war. Two forces older than kingdoms. More powerful than reason. Ares finally stepped forward. You should leave, Aphrodite whispered softly, though neither of them moved. You don't want me to. No. The honesty in her voice shattered the final barrier between them. Ares kissed her, and the world itself seemed to react. The wind suddenly rose through the trees. Water trembled. Flowers opened wider beneath moonlight. Because this was not ordinary passion. This was cosmic force colliding with cosmic force. Love and war becoming one. Aphrodite pulled him closer desperately, almost violently, as though resisting him had exhausted her for too long already. And Ares, who had conquered cities, slaughtered armies, terrified nations, held her with surprising gentleness. That contradiction made the moment even more dangerous. Because beneath all his brutality, the war god loved intensely, completely. The Greeks understood this terrifying truth better than most modern people ever will. The most violent hearts often love with equal intensity, and the strongest passions can create either beauty or destruction depending on where they're directed. That night beneath Mount Ida, Aphrodite and Ares surrendered completely to one another. No politics, no arranged marriages, no divine expectations, only desire, only longing, only the overwhelming relief of finally giving in. And afterward, lying together beneath the stars, Aphrodite experienced something unfamiliar. Peace, not the calm perfection expected of Olympian gods. Real peace. The kind mortals sometimes feel only briefly after finally touching the thing they wanted most. Ares brushed his fingers gently through her golden hair. "You regret this?" he asked quietly. Aphrodite looked at him for a long moment. "No," she whispered. But high above them, unseen beyond the darkness, another god watched from the sky. Helios, the sun god. Each day Helios crossed the heavens in his blazing chariot, witnessing everything beneath him. Very little escaped his sight, and now he had seen enough to change Olympus forever. Because secrets never remain hidden long among immortals. Especially not affairs. Especially not affairs involving Aphrodite. And especially not affairs involving the god of war. After that night on Mount Ida, nothing between Aphrodite and Ares could ever return to what it had been before. The line had been crossed, and once desire becomes reality, it changes everything. At first they tried convincing themselves it had only been a single moment of weakness. One night, one mistake, but neither truly believed that. Because what existed between them was far too powerful to disappear quietly. Ares had spent eternity surrounded by violence, fear, and conquest. Everywhere he walked, armies trembled. Mortals screamed his name in battlefields soaked red with blood. Even the other gods often tolerated him rather than loved him. But Aphrodite looked at him differently. She did not fear the brutality inside him. She understood it. And Aphrodite herself had existed forever as an object of worship and desire. Mortals prayed for her favor. Gods competed for her attention. Poets spent entire lives trying to describe her beauty. Yet most never saw her as anything beyond beauty itself. Ares did. He saw the darkness beneath the radiance. The dangerous truth hidden inside love. That was why they kept returning to one another. Again and again and again. Their secret meetings spread across the ancient world like invisible fire. Sometimes they met in hidden groves sacred to Aphrodite, where flowers bloomed year-round regardless of season. Sometimes inside caves beneath cypress, where the sound of waves crashing against stone drowned out whispered voices. And sometimes they met on battlefields after wars ended. Those moments fascinated later Greek storytellers most of all, because there was something hauntingly beautiful about the goddess of love walking through fields still scarred by violence, while the god of war waited among the smoke and silence. Ares would remove pieces of blood-stained armor before touching her, almost ashamed for her to see the destruction still clinging to him. But Aphrodite never turned away. She touched his scars gently, every single one, and in those moments, the terrifying god worshipped by armies looked almost human. That contradiction became central to their relationship. Aphrodite softened Ares without weakening him, and Ares awakened something wild inside Aphrodite that no one else ever reached. The Greeks deeply understood why this relationship mattered symbolically. Love and war have always traveled together through human history. Men marched into battle for lovers waiting at home. Cities burned because rulers desired power, beauty, or revenge. Jealousy caused murder. Passion caused destruction. Even the famous Trojan War, still waiting in the future during this time, would eventually begin because of Aphrodite herself. The Greeks did not separate desire from chaos. To them, the strongest emotions always carried danger, and no gods represented that truth more perfectly than Aphrodite and Ares. But secrecy became increasingly difficult. Olympus noticed changes quickly. Gods are immortal, which means they become experts at observing one another over endless centuries. Apollo noticed first. The sun, bright god of music and prophecy, watched Aphrodite carefully during feasts and celebrations. He saw how her attention drifted toward Ares, even when pretending otherwise. He saw how Ares suddenly appeared calmer whenever Aphrodite entered a room. Apollo said nothing, but he understood. Hermes noticed next. The messenger god joked constantly, yet beneath his humor existed sharp intelligence. He caught stolen glances, lingering touches, the subtle tension between the lovers whenever they stood near one another. One evening Hermes quietly approached Aphrodite during a feast. "You know," he said casually while sipping wine, "Olympus is not very good at keeping secrets." Aphrodite froze for half a heartbeat. Only half. But Hermes noticed. He always noticed. "You speak strangely tonight," she replied calmly. Hermes smiled slightly. "I usually do." Then he walked away before she could answer. The message was clear. People were beginning to suspect. Even Hera watched carefully now. And Hera understood betrayal better than anyone on Olympus. As the wife of Zeus, she had endured endless humiliations caused by her husband's affairs. Her anger toward unfaithfulness had become legendary among both gods and mortals. Yet strangely, Hera felt little sympathy for Hephaestus. Perhaps because she knew arranged marriages rarely create genuine love. Or perhaps because even she could see the impossible tension between Aphrodite and Ares whenever they occupied the same room. Meanwhile, Hephaestus remained buried inside his endless work. Far beneath volcanic mountains, the forge roared day and night. Massive hammers crashed against glowing metal, while rivers of molten bronze illuminated cavern walls with orange light. The divine smith worked harder than ever now, and somewhere deep inside himself, he already knew something was wrong. Not consciously, not fully, but instincts do not disappear simply because immortals wish them away. Aphrodite no longer looked at him the same way. Her smiles felt distant. Her visits to the forge became rare. Sometimes she returned home carrying the faint scent of forests, sea air, or distant battlefields instead of Olympus itself. And though Hephaestus never confronted her, the suspicion slowly began poisoning him from within. Still, he loved her. That was the cruelest part. The smith god continued creating magnificent gifts, hoping somehow they might repair what he could not even fully admit was broken. He forged bracelets glowing softly beneath moonlight. Hairpins shaped like roses made from gold so delicate they seemed alive. Even mechanical birds capable of singing love songs. But Aphrodite accepted the gifts with guilt rather than joy, because pity was slowly turning into something worse. Shame. One night, after leaving the forge, Aphrodite traveled alone to Cyprus. The sea welcomed her immediately. Waves softened around her feet, while warm wind carried the scent of salt and flowers across the shore. This island still remembered her birth. Here she felt most herself. Not queen, not wife, not symbol, just Aphrodite. She walked along the coastline beneath moonlight until a familiar voice spoke behind her. "You disappear often lately." Ares. Of course. Even here he found her. The war god approached wearing dark armor, partially hidden beneath a traveling cloak. Moonlight reflected softly against bronze plates, scarred from combat. Aphrodite smiled despite herself. "You followed me. You wanted me to. That confidence will destroy you someday." Ares stepped closer. "Not tonight. The tension between them had become unbearable by then. Every conversation felt charged, every glance dangerous. And when they kissed again beside the sea, Aphrodite felt the same overwhelming pull she had tried and failed to resist since Mount Ida. The Greeks believed the sea itself responded to strong emotions from the gods. That night, waves crashed harder against the shore, while distant thunder rolled beyond the horizon. Even nature reacted to them. Far above the world, Helios watched. The sun god had become increasingly suspicious after witnessing their encounter on Mount Ida. Unlike the other Olympians, Helios possessed a unique advantage. Every day he crossed the sky. Every day he saw the world below from horizon to horizon. Very little escaped his sight. At first Helios said nothing. He observed, watched patterns emerge. Ares disappearing from battlefields unexpectedly. Aphrodite vanishing from Olympus at strange hours. The same hidden locations appearing repeatedly across Greece and Cyprus. Eventually suspicion became certainty. One dawn, Helios witnessed the lovers sleeping together beside the shore after a night hidden beneath the stars. Aphrodite lay against Ares while waves rolled softly nearby. For a brief moment, they looked peaceful, almost mortal, and strangely, Helios felt conflicted, because despite the scandal, despite the betrayal, there was something undeniably real about what existed between them. More real, perhaps, than many divine marriages arranged for politics and power. But truth remained truth, and secrets among gods never stay buried forever. Helios faced a choice: remain silent, or reveal everything. The sun god respected Hephaestus greatly. The divine smith had crafted parts of Helios's blazing chariot centuries earlier. Their bond came from shared labor and craftsmanship rather than politics. To Helios, allowing the betrayal to continue felt dishonorable. So he made his decision. Far beneath the earth inside his volcanic forge, Hephaestus worked alone, shaping molten gold into delicate chains finer than spider silk. Sweat mixed with ash across his scarred face while sparks erupted around him. Then suddenly the forge darkened. The flames bent unnaturally, and Helios entered. The arrival of the sun god illuminated the cavern with blinding golden light. Even the molten rivers seemed dim beside him. Hephaestus immediately sensed something was wrong. Helios rarely visited the forge unannounced. The smith god lowered his hammer slowly. What brings the sun himself beneath mountains? Helios hesitated. For perhaps the first time in centuries, the radiant god looked uncomfortable. Then finally he spoke. It concerns Aphrodite. The silence afterward felt enormous. Heavy. Dangerous. Hephaestus stared at him without moving. And somewhere deep inside himself, he already knew what was coming next. Helios told him everything. The meetings. The forests. The hidden nights beside the sea. Ares. At first Hephaestus said nothing. He simply listened while molten metal hissed quietly nearby. But as Helios continued speaking, something changed inside the smith god's eyes. Not explosive anger. That would have been simpler. Worse than anger. Humiliation. Pain. The slow destruction of trust. Every gift he had crafted for Aphrodite suddenly felt pathetic. Every attempt at love seemed foolish. The realization hollowed him from within. Yet even then, Hephaestus did not immediately rage. He did not storm toward Olympus. He did not confront Ares. Instead, the divine smith became very still. And that stillness frightened Helios more than fury would have. Because Hephaestus was not merely a god. He was the greatest craftsman in existence. His mind solved problems differently from the other Olympians. Where Ares relied on force, Hephaestus relied on precision, planning, patience. Slowly the smith god turned back toward the forge. The rivers of molten gold reflected inside his eyes. When will they meet again? He asked quietly. Helios hesitated, then answered, tomorrow night. Another long silence followed. Then Hephaestus reached for his tools. And for the first time since learning the truth, he smiled. Not with happiness, with purpose. Because while Ares conquered through violence and Aphrodite conquered through desire, Hephaestus ruled over something equally powerful: ingenuity. And deep beneath the mountains, beside roaring fire and molten metal, the betrayed god began building a trap that would humiliate love and war before all Olympus. The forge burned hotter than ever. Deep beneath volcanic mountains, rivers of molten metal rolled through enormous black caverns while sparks exploded upward like swarms of stars. The air itself shimmered from unbearable heat. Cyclopes hammered bronze in distant chambers, their massive strikes echoing endlessly through the underground halls. But at the center of it all stood Hephaestus alone, silent, focused, changed. The revelation from Helios had shattered something inside him. Yet instead of collapsing beneath grief, the divine smith transformed his pain into purpose. That was always his way. Other gods reacted emotionally. Hephaestus created. His massive scarred hands moved carefully across glowing metal while ancient tools surrounded him. Chains, hooks, gears, unfinished weapons, mechanical birds, golden statues capable of movement, all lay scattered across the forge like fragments of impossible genius. But tonight he worked on something different, something personal, a trap, and not just any trap, a masterpiece. If Ares represented raw force and Aphrodite represented irresistible desire, then Hephaestus represented intelligence sharpened by suffering. Every humiliation he had ever endured, the fall from Olympus, the mockery of the gods, the loneliness of his existence, had forged his mind into something terrifyingly precise. He would not confront them in anger. He would expose them perfectly. Hephaestus began with gold. Not ordinary gold mined from mortal earth, but divine metal drawn from deep beneath volcanic chambers, where even gods rarely ventured. The molten substance glowed, white-hot beneath his hammer. Again, again, again. Each strike echoed like thunder. Slowly he forged the material into threads finer than spider silk. Impossible threads, nearly invisible, yet stronger than iron. As he worked, memories poisoned his thoughts. Aphrodite smiling politely while accepting his gifts. Aphrodite leaving the forge quickly whenever possible. Aphrodite distant, distracted, gone. The realization hurt more than the betrayal itself. She had never truly loved him. Perhaps she had tried. Perhaps she had even pitied him enough to pretend for a while. But pity is not love. And Hephaestus, despite all his brilliance, had wanted something impossible. He wanted the goddess of desire to desire him. The forge roared louder. Molten sparks burst violently around him as his emotions slipped briefly into the fires themselves. Yet even through heartbreak, his craftsmanship remained flawless. Piece by piece, the trap took shape. The net appeared delicate, beautiful even. Golden strands woven together so finely they vanished completely when held against light. But hidden within the design were ancient binding enchantments known only to the divine smith. Once activated, the net would tighten instantly around whatever it captured. No mortal strength could break it. More importantly, no divine power could escape it, not even Ares. Meanwhile, above the world, Aphrodite knew nothing. She moved through Olympus radiant as ever while secret excitement burned beneath her calm exterior. Danger had become part of the affair now, and danger intensified desire. The Greeks understood this uncomfortable truth deeply. Forbidden love often feels stronger precisely because it risks destruction. Aphrodite should have ended the affair. Part of her understood that clearly. But every time she saw Ares, reason disappeared, because the war god looked at her differently from everyone else. Not like an untouchable goddess, not like an object of worship. He looked at her like a woman, desired completely. And Ares himself had fallen far deeper than he realized. The god of war was used to restraint. He took what he wanted in battle, in conflict, in life itself. Yet around Aphrodite, he found himself patient in ways that felt almost painful. He craved her constantly, not merely physically, entirely. When she disappeared, He became restless. Battles felt dull. Victories felt empty. Even violence itself lost some of its excitement whenever she remained away too long. That frightened him slightly, because dependence was dangerous, and Ares hated weakness. But love and weakness often resemble one another. The next evening the lovers met again. A hidden chamber inside Aphrodite's palace. Soft torchlight illuminated marble walls decorated with roses and seashells. Silk curtains moved gently in warm night air drifting through open windows. Outside, Olympus celebrated another endless feast. Inside, Aphrodite waited alone. Then the doors opened. Ares entered quietly. No armor tonight. No weapons. Only dark robes, partially covering the scars, spread across his body like reminders of countless wars. The moment Aphrodite saw him, everything else disappeared. She crossed the room immediately and kissed him before either could speak. Urgent, desperate, as though some instinct deep inside her already sensed time running out. Ares pulled her close, his rough hands moving carefully against her skin despite all the violence those same hands had inflicted upon battlefields across history. You missed me, he murmured softly. Aphrodite smiled faintly. You're arrogant. You did. I did. The honesty between them had become effortless now. That made the affair even more dangerous. They spent hours together, while Olympus celebrated outside, unaware that two of its most powerful gods lay entwined in secret passion nearby. Aphrodite rested against Ares while candlelight flickered across their skin. You ever think about leaving Olympus? She asked quietly. Ares looked surprised. Leaving? Sometimes I hate it there. The war god studied her carefully. You're the most desired being in existence. That doesn't mean I belong there. Those words revealed something important about Aphrodite. Beauty often creates isolation. Everyone desired her. Very few understood her. Ares brushed his fingers through her golden hair, slowly. You belong wherever you choose. For a long moment, Aphrodite simply stared at him. Then she kissed him again, harder this time, almost violently. Outside the chamber, unseen and unheard, tiny golden mechanisms shifted silently within the walls. Hephaestus's trap had already been prepared. Earlier that evening, while Olympus celebrated, the divine smith had entered Aphrodite's chambers unnoticed. No god understood hidden mechanisms better than Hephaestus. He moved through the palace like a ghost. Silent, calm, terrifyingly focused. The invisible net now rested above the lover's bed, concealed, so perfectly even divine eyes could not detect it. All that remained was waiting, and Hephaestus had spent his entire life waiting. Back inside the chamber, Aphrodite and Ares remained completely unaware. They spoke quietly for hours afterward, about Olympus, about war, about mortals. Those conversations fascinated later Greek storytellers because they revealed how strangely similar love and battle truly are. Ares described warriors marching into impossible combat because they loved homeland, family, or glory more than life itself. Aphrodite spoke about lovers destroying themselves through obsession and longing. Different emotions, same intensity. The Greeks believed passion itself was dangerous regardless of form. Love could create beauty, or catastrophe. So could war. Eventually exhaustion overtook them. Aphrodite lay beside Ares beneath silk coverings while moonlight spilled softly through open windows. For a rare moment, both gods looked peaceful, vulnerable even. Then the trap activated. Without warning, golden threads exploded downward around them. Ares reacted instantly on instinct, reaching for weapons that were not there. Too late. The net tightened around both lovers with impossible speed. Golden strands wrapped around arms, legs, torsos, binding them together completely. Aphrodite gasped in shock. Ares roared with fury. The chamber shook violently. The war god strained against the bonds with strength capable of crushing armies. Nothing happened. The more he struggled, the tighter the net became. Golden light spread across the threads as Hephaestus's enchantments awakened fully. Ares realized immediately what had happened. Hephaestus. Aphrodite's face drained of color. For the first time since their affair began, genuine fear entered the room. Because this was not merely discovery. This was humiliation. The doors burst open, and there stood Hephaestus. The forge god entered slowly, illuminated by flickering torchlight. Ash still marked his scarred skin from the workshops below the mountains. His expression looked calm. Far too calm. Behind him came other gods. Apollo, Hermes, Poseidon. One by one, the Olympians gathered outside the chamber drawn by Hephaestus' summons. And then they saw them. Aphrodite and Ares trapped naked together inside the glowing golden net. Silence lasted only a heartbeat. Then Olympus erupted. Hermes burst into laughter, first unable to stop himself. Apollo covered his mouth, trying unsuccessfully to hide amusement. Even Poseidon looked stunned by the sheer audacity of the trap itself. Because despite the scandal, every god immediately recognized the brilliance of Hephaestus' craftsmanship. The net was extraordinary, virtually invisible, completely inescapable. Ares struggled violently against the bindings again, fury radiating from him like heat. "Release me," he snarled. Hephaestus looked directly at him. No. The simplicity of the answer made it worse. Aphrodite closed her eyes briefly, overwhelmed by humiliation as laughter and whispers spread through the gathered gods. The goddess who inspired desire across the world now lay exposed before Olympus itself. And beside her, trapped helplessly, was the terrifying god of war reduced to impotence by a craftsman's intelligence. Hephaestus stepped closer slowly. "I gave you everything," he said quietly to Aphrodite. Those words hurt more than rage would have. Because beneath the humiliation, beneath the anger, the pain remained real. The smith god turned toward the assembled Olympians. "Look well," he declared bitterly. "See how the god of war repays trust." Ares glared at him with murderous fury. Yet underneath that rage existed something unfamiliar. Shame. Because despite everything, part of him knew Hephaestus had not deserved betrayal. Hermes leaned casually against the doorway, shaking his head. "I have to admit," the messenger god said, laughing softly, "this is the greatest trap ever built." Even Apollo smiled reluctantly. The tension inside the room became strange. Part scandal, part comedy, part tragedy. That complexity made the story survive for thousands of years afterward. Because no one involved was entirely villain or victim. Hephaestus had been betrayed, but Aphrodite had never truly chosen the marriage. Ares had followed passion recklessly, yet his feelings were genuine, and all of them were trapped inside divine politics far older than themselves. Still, none of that changed the humiliation unfolding before Olympus now. Aphrodite opened her eyes finally and looked directly at Hephaestus. For a moment the room became silent again. No laughter, no whispers, only the goddess of love staring at the husband she had betrayed. And somewhere beneath all the pain, guilt finally reached her completely. But events had already moved beyond apology. Because Olympus loves scandal more than mercy. And soon the entire divine world would know what happened inside Aphrodite's chamber that night. The laughter spread through Olympus faster than wildfire. Gods who had crossed oceans in moments arrived outside Aphrodite's chamber simply to witness the scandal with their own eyes. Immortals crowded the golden halls whispering, mocking, arguing, and marveling at the impossible sight before them. Aphrodite and Ares, caught together, trapped helplessly inside Hephaestus' invisible net. The scene became legendary immediately, because no one had ever imagined the god of war himself could be captured so completely. Ares continued struggling against the glowing threads, every movement making the bindings tighten further around him and Aphrodite alike. His muscles strained with enough force to shatter mountains, yet the net held perfectly. That terrified even the other gods. Not because of the affair, because of Hephaestus. For centuries, many Olympians had quietly underestimated the smith god. They mocked his limp, ignored his loneliness, pitted his isolation within the forge beneath volcanic mountains. But now every immortal gathered there realized something dangerous. Hephaestus possessed a kind of power none of them fully understood. The power to create. And creation often outlasts brute strength. Apollo stepped closer, studying the glowing net carefully. Incredible craftsmanship, he murmured almost himself. Hermes laughed again beside him. You sound impressed. I am impressed. How long do you think Ares has been trying to escape? Long enough to become embarrassed. The messenger god grinned. That may take eternity. Ares glared toward them with murderous fury. The air itself shook from his rage. Had he been free, blood might have spilled across Olympus that very night. But Hephaestus had planned everything too perfectly. Poseidon folded his arms while examining the trapped lovers silently. Even the sea god, brother of Zeus and ruler of oceans, could not hide admiration for the smith's ingenuity. You forged this alone? Poseidon finally asked. Hephaestus nodded once. No pride existed in his expression, only exhaustion. The room slowly quieted as more gods arrived. Artemis appeared briefly, but left almost immediately disgusted by the spectacle. Athena observed everything carefully without speaking, her gray eyes studying not the affair itself, but the consequences unfolding from it. Because Athena understood politics better than most Olympians. And this scandal threatened to divide the gods. Some sympathized with Hephaestus. Others secretly admired Aphrodite and Ares for following genuine passion despite Zeus's arranged marriage. The tension grew heavier with every passing moment. Then Hera arrived. The queen of Olympus stepped through the crowd slowly, golden robes flowing behind her, while silence spread instantly through the gathered immortals. No goddess understood betrayal more personally than Hera, and everyone waited to see her reaction. She looked first at Ares, her son, then at Aphrodite, then finally at Hephaestus. For a long moment she said nothing. Then surprisingly, Hera spoke softly. Release them. The room stirred immediately. Hephaestus stared at her in disbelief. They humiliated me before Olympus, he answered bitterly. And now you have humiliated them before eternity, Hera replied calmly. Those words struck harder than anger. Because everyone present understood she was right. The story would never disappear. Mortals would tell it for thousands of years. Poets would sing about it. Artists would paint it. The humiliation had already become immortal. Yet Hephaestus did not release the net. Not yet. Too much pain still burned inside him. For years he had accepted distance, loneliness, quiet rejection. He convinced himself patience and kindness might eventually create love. Now he finally understood the truth. You cannot forge desire, no matter how skilled the craftsman. Aphrodite lifted her eyes toward him slowly. For the first time since the trap activated, she finally spoke. I never meant to hurt you. The honesty in her voice made the chamber even quieter. Because she meant it. Aphrodite had not entered the marriage intending cruelty. She had tried to fulfill the role Zeus forced upon her. But trying is not the same as loving. Hephaestus looked at her for a long time. Then he asked the question that truly mattered. Did you ever love me at all? Aphrodite could not answer immediately, and that silence became answer enough. The smith god closed his eyes briefly as though something inside him finally broke completely. Even Hermes stopped smiling, because beneath all the comedy, the scandal remained tragic. The Greeks understood this deeply. Love stories rarely survive without pain, especially among gods. Meanwhile, Zeus had not yet appeared. That absence itself worried Olympus, because whenever Zeus delayed reacting to conflict, it usually meant his anger was growing dangerous. Thunder rolled faintly outside the palace now. Clouds darkened above Olympus. The king of the gods was coming. Ares sensed it too. His fury slowly shifted into readiness. Unlike Aphrodite, the war god did not regret the affair itself. He regretted only the humiliation and weakness of being captured. If Zeus chose punishment, Ares fully intended resistance. That possibility frightened everyone, because conflict between Olympians could devastate the mortal world itself. At last the palace trembled. Thunder exploded across the sky, and Zeus entered. The crowd of gods immediately parted. The king of Olympus moved through them slowly, surrounded by the scent of storms and lightning. His expression revealed almost nothing, which somehow felt more threatening than rage. Zeus looked first at Hephaestus, then at the trapped lovers, then at the gathered immortals watching the spectacle like entertainment. Silence consumed the hall completely. Finally Zeus spoke. So, just one word. Yet thunder echoed behind it. Ares met his father's gaze without fear. Aphrodite remained silent. Hephaestus stood rigid beside the bed, fists clenched tightly. Zeus studied them all carefully. The king of the gods understood immediately that this scandal represented more than infidelity. It exposed failure. His failure. The marriage he arranged to preserve peace had instead created chaos. And now Olympus itself teetered on division because of it. How long? Zeus asked coldly. Neither lover answered. Hermes quietly muttered under his breath. Long enough. Apollo elbowed him sharply. Zeus ignored them. His attention remained fixed on Ares. You dishonor this house. Ares finally spoke. It was never a real marriage. Gasps spread through the room. Even Hera narrowed her eyes slightly. Because though the words sounded cruel, many secretly agreed. Zeus's expression darkened. You speak boldly for someone caught in chains. The war god smiled faintly despite the situation. Then release me. Lightning flashed violently outside Olympus. For one terrifying instant, it seemed battle might erupt directly inside the palace. But Zeus controlled himself. Barely. The king of the gods turned toward Hephaestus instead. What do you want? The question surprised everyone, Hephaestus himself included, because punishment alone would not solve this disaster. Zeus needed resolution. Carefully, the smith god answered, I want acknowledgement. The room remained silent. For years, Hephaestus continued quietly. I served Olympus faithfully. I forged weapons, palaces, armor, wonders beyond imagination. Yet everyone looked at me with pity. His eyes moved briefly toward Aphrodite. I loved honestly. That was my mistake. No one interrupted him. Not even Zeus. I wanted them to feel humiliation too, Hephaestus admitted. Just once. And there it was. The real heart of the tragedy. Not revenge. Not cruelty. Pain. Pure pain. The gods understood emotion better than mortals in some ways, because immortality intensified everything. Love became obsession. Anger became catastrophe. Jealousy became war. And humiliation among immortals could last forever. Zeus finally exhaled slowly. Release them. This time Hephaestus obeyed. The golden net dissolved instantly into streams of light vanishing back into hidden mechanisms above the chamber. Ares stood immediately. The atmosphere changed at once. Even free, the war god radiated restrained violence now. Aphrodite rose beside him, gathering silk coverings around herself while avoiding everyone's gaze. For perhaps the first time in her existence, the goddess of beauty felt exposed beyond physical appearance. Emotionally exposed. Vulnerable. The gathered gods stepped back instinctively as Ares moved toward the doorway. Zeus's voice stopped him. This is not finished. Ares turned slowly. No, he answered calmly. It isn't. Then he left. Aphrodite hesitated only briefly before following him. And that choice mattered enormously. She could have remained beside Hephaestus, could have apologized further, could have attempted repair. Instead, she walked after Ares. Love choosing war. Again, Hephaestus watched her leave without speaking. That image would haunt later Greek imagination for centuries. The abandoned smith standing alone while the goddess he loved walked away beside another god. Yet strangely, many myths afterward suggest Hephaestus changed after that night. The humiliation hardened him, but also freed him. No longer chasing impossible affection, the smith god devoted himself completely to creation. Some of his greatest masterpieces would emerge afterward. Living statues, enchanted palaces, mechanical servants crafted from gold. Pain transformed into genius. As for Aphrodite and Ares, their affair did not end. If anything, exposure intensified it, because now secrecy no longer restrained them. Olympus whispered constantly afterward. Some gods condemned them, others admired them. Mortals below began telling stories about the dangerous connection between love and conflict. And slowly, across Greece itself, worshippers started recognizing Aphrodite and Ares not merely as separate deities, but as two halves of the same terrifying force. Because desire can start wars, and wars can begin from desire. The Greeks never forgot that lesson. Not after Aphrodite, not after Ares, and certainly not after the night love and war were caught together beneath a net forged from heartbreak itself. After the scandal on Olympus, something fundamental changed among the gods. The affair between Aphrodite and Ares no longer existed as rumor hidden behind palace walls. It became known openly across both divine and mortal worlds. And strangely, once the secrecy vanished, the relationship itself became even stronger. Many Olympians expected the affair to collapse after the humiliation. Instead, it survived. That shocked them, because most passions fade once exposed to public judgment. But what existed between Aphrodite and Ares was deeper than mere attraction now. They had suffered together, been mocked together, defied Olympus together, shared humiliation, forged strange loyalties. And the Greeks understood something important about forbidden love. Once two people survive disgrace side by side, their bond often grows more dangerous rather than weaker. Ares began spending less time among the halls of Olympus afterward. The laughter of the gods lingered too heavily there. Even immortals remember humiliation. Instead, the war god traveled constantly across the mortal world, visiting battlefields, training camps, and cities preparing for war. Wherever armies gathered, Ares walked among them unseen, feeding upon the tension before violence erupted. But now Aphrodite often accompanied him. That terrified the Greeks symbolically, because the presence of both gods together meant conflict fueled by passion rather than reason. And history repeatedly proved how destructive that combination could become. Kings declared wars to possess beautiful women. Empires collapsed because rulers could not control desire. Brother murdered brother over jealousy. Cities burned over wounded pride and love affairs. To Greek thinkers, Aphrodite and Ares represented forces that constantly shaped human civilization from the shadows. One inspired desire, the other inspired violence. Together, they created obsession. Ancient poets began describing moments when Aphrodite walked across battlefields after wars ended, searching for Ares among smoke and blood. These stories spread widely through Greece because they captured a haunting emotional truth. Even in places of death, love survives. And sometimes love itself creates those places. One legend told of Aphrodite entering a battlefield at dusk after thousands of soldiers died beneath Ares' influence. Broken spears littered the ground. Bodies covered the earth. Ravens circled silently overhead, while rivers carried blood toward the sea. Yet in the middle of that destruction stood Ares alone, still armored, still stained by war. The god of violence looked almost monstrous beneath fading sunlight. But when Aphrodite approached him, his expression changed instantly. The fury faded. The tension left his body. And for a brief moment, the terrifying god of war simply looked tired. The Greeks loved stories like this because they reflected their complicated understanding of masculinity, conflict, and emotional vulnerability. Even the strongest warriors needed love, especially them. Meanwhile, Aphrodite herself changed in subtle ways after the affair became public. Before Ares, she often represented beauty in its purest form: seduction, attraction, pleasure, fertility. But afterward, her myths gained darker edges. Now she became associated not only with romance, but with destructive passion, obsession, jealousy, madness caused by desire. This transformation appeared clearly in mortal stories connected to her worship. More and more legends described lovers driven insane by longing, men abandoning families because Aphrodite cursed them with uncontrollable desire, women risking kingdoms for forbidden relationships. The goddess herself became both worshipped and feared, because beauty can heal, but beauty can also destroy. That duality fascinated Greek religion deeply. No force in existence was entirely good or evil. Everything powerful carried danger. Even love, especially love. It was during this period that Aphrodite and Ares produced children together, offspring who perfectly embodied the strange union between passion and violence. Each child reflected a different aspect of their parents' combined nature, and through them, the Greeks explained many of humanity's most intense emotions. The most famous was Eros. Though older traditions described Eros as a primordial cosmic force born near the beginning of creation itself, later Greek mythology increasingly portrayed him as the son of Aphrodite and Ares. This version of Eros differed greatly from modern romantic imagination. He was not harmless, not innocent. The Greeks did not imagine love as soft and safe. Their Eros was dangerous. Beautiful, yes, but dangerous. Artists portrayed him as a winged youth carrying bow and arrows crafted from divine gold. One arrow inspired overwhelming desire. Another inspired rejection and disgust. With these weapons, Eros manipulated gods and mortals alike, often causing chaos simply for amusement. But beneath the playful imagery existed deeper symbolism. The arrows represented how suddenly attraction could transform human behavior. One glance, one moment, and entire lives change forever. That terrified the Greeks because it revealed how fragile rational thought truly is when confronted by passion. Eros inherited traits from both parents. From Aphrodite came beauty, charm, seduction. From Ares came aggression, unpredictability, conquest. Love itself became portrayed almost like warfare. People fell in love. Hearts became pierced. Desire attacked. Even modern language still carries echoes of these ancient ideas. Another child born from the union was Phobos, the god of fear and panic. Unlike Eros, Phobos resembled his father more clearly. Ancient descriptions portrayed him as dark-eyed and unsettling, capable of spreading terror across battlefields merely through presence alone. But Phobos represented more than simple fear of combat. He also embodied emotional panic, the terror lovers feel when facing rejection, the anxiety of vulnerability, the fear of losing someone deeply desired. To the Greeks, emotional fear and battlefield fear came from similar places inside the human soul. Both involved surrender and control. That connection explains why Phobos belonged equally to both parents. His brother Deimos represented dread and horror, the slow psychological terror preceding violence or heartbreak. Together, the brothers often accompanied Ares into war riding beside his chariot, while panic spread among armies before battles even began. Yet, Greek poets also connected them to romantic suffering, sleepless nights, obsessive longing, emotional torment. Again, the symbolism remained clear. Love and fear constantly travel together. The Greeks knew vulnerability creates both. Perhaps the most fascinating child of Aphrodite and Ares was Harmonia. Unlike her siblings, Harmonia represented balance rather than chaos. Her existence carried profound symbolic meaning. From a union of love and war emerged harmony itself. The Greeks considered that deeply important philosophically, because true harmony does not come from avoiding conflict entirely. It emerges from opposing forces learning coexistence. Ancient storytellers described Harmonia as breathtakingly beautiful, yet unusually calm compared to the emotional intensity surrounding her parents. Where Ares burned hot with aggression and Aphrodite overwhelmed others through irresistible desire, Harmonia inspired peace, understanding, and unity. Her marriage to Cadmus later became one of the most famous mythological weddings in Greek tradition. Even the gods attended the celebration. Yet because Greek mythology rarely allowed pure happiness to exist untouched, Harmonia's story eventually descended into tragedy too. The necklace gifted to her during the wedding, crafted by Hephaestus according to many versions, became cursed, bringing destruction upon future generations. Even Harmony itself could not fully escape the consequences of divine conflict. That idea reflected another important Greek belief. The actions of gods echo across generations. No passion ends cleanly. No betrayal disappears without consequence. Meanwhile, worship of Aphrodite across Greece evolved dramatically after stories of the affair spread. Different cities emphasized different aspects of the goddess. In Corinth, where sacred prostitution formed part of her cult practices, Aphrodite became associated heavily with physical passion and earthly pleasure. Sailors, merchants, courtesans, and travelers visited her temples seeking blessings connected to attraction and desire. In Athens, philosophers increasingly focused on Aphrodite Urania, the heavenly aspect of love connected to spiritual beauty, intellectual admiration, and emotional connection beyond physical desire. This distinction between Aphrodite Pandemos and Aphrodite Urania became central to Greek thought. Pandemos represented common love, physical attraction, human passion, the dangerous emotional intensity connected strongly to Ares and the affair itself. Urania represented elevated love, the appreciation of beauty leading toward wisdom and self-understanding. Yet the Greeks rarely treated these forms as completely separate. Most believed both existed inside every human relationship. Physical desire and emotional connection, pleasure and pain, harmony and conflict, always together. That complexity made Greek mythology endure for thousands of years afterward. The gods reflected real human contradictions rather than simplistic morality. Aphrodite herself became one of the most prayed-to deities in the Mediterranean world because everyone eventually encounters desire in some form. Young lovers prayed for romance. Married couples prayed for fertility. Courtesans prayed for charm. Artists prayed for inspiration. Even soldiers prayed before battle, believing Aphrodite's favor could strengthen emotional bonds between warriors. Because armies do not fight effectively without love. Love of homeland, love of comrades, love of glory. The Greeks saw those connections everywhere. And standing beside Aphrodite in many temples now appeared statues of Ares himself. Not always openly, sometimes subtly. A shield hidden among roses. A spear carved beside doves. Small reminders that desire and violence remain forever linked. Over time, even mortals began creating stories claiming wars themselves could attract Aphrodite's attention. Beautiful warriors supposedly received special favor from the goddess. Heroes returning from battle often inspired intense admiration because danger itself carried seductive power. The Greeks recognized this uncomfortable truth honestly. Violence can attract. Power can seduce. That reality disturbed them. Yet they refused pretending otherwise. And no myth embodied that truth more completely than Aphrodite and Ares. Their affair eventually became larger than scandal. It transformed into explanation, a way for ancient people to understand why humans repeatedly destroy themselves through passion, why desire overrides logic, why love can create beauty one moment and catastrophe the next. Far below Olympus, mortals continued telling their story beside fires, in marketplaces, at temples, and during festivals dedicated to the gods. Some told it as comedy, others as tragedy. Most understood it as both, because that is how the Greeks viewed life itself. Beautiful, cruel, passionate, dangerous, and impossible to separate love from suffering for very long. Long after the scandal with Ares faded into legend, Aphrodite's influence only grew stronger. In fact, The humiliation on Olympus strangely increased her power among mortals, because people trusted flawed gods more than perfect ones. Aphrodite had suffered passion, shame, desire, loss of control, all the emotions ordinary humans battled every day. They made her feel real. And across the Mediterranean world, her temples filled constantly with worshippers seeking help in matters of love, beauty, fertility, marriage, seduction, and heartbreak. The Greeks feared many gods, but they needed Aphrodite, because no human escapes desire forever. Kings knelt before her altars just as desperately as peasants. Young brides prayed for affection from husbands they barely knew. Sailors carried charms bearing her symbol during long voyages away from lovers waiting at home. Courtesans dedicated mirrors, jewelry, and perfume bottles inside her temples, hoping the goddess would preserve their beauty. Even philosophers who claimed reason ruled the universe secretly acknowledged Aphrodite's power. After all, history itself repeatedly changed because someone fell in love, or lust, or obsession, and no event proved that truth more clearly than the Trojan War. The war would become the most famous conflict in all Greek mythology, a catastrophe involving heroes, kings, monsters, prophecies, divine intervention, and unimaginable destruction. But according to Greek tradition, everything began because of Aphrodite. More specifically, because of beauty. The origins of the war began during the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, parents of the future hero Achilles. Nearly every god attended the celebration. Music echoed across divine halls while immortals feasted beneath golden light. Nectar flowed endlessly. The greatest beings in existence gathered together peacefully for once. But one goddess was not invited. Eris, the goddess of discord. The Greeks understood something psychologically profound through Eris. Conflict often emerges not from grand evil, but from wounded pride. Feeling excluded, forgotten, humiliated, and Eris embodied exactly that. Furious at being denied invitation to the wedding, she arrived unannounced carrying a single golden apple. Upon its surface, she carved simple words, "To the fairest." Then she threw the apple among the goddesses. Chaos followed instantly, because beauty among immortals was not merely appearance. Beauty represented status, power, validation, and three goddesses immediately claimed the prize. Hera, Athena, Aphrodite, each believed herself worthy. Each refused surrender. And suddenly Olympus itself teetered toward conflict once again. Zeus wisely refused judging the dispute himself. The king of the gods understood perfectly that no answer could satisfy all three. Choosing one goddess would create two dangerous enemies. So instead he selected a mortal judge, Paris of Troy. That decision changed history forever. Paris was a Trojan prince raised partly as a shepherd far from royal politics. Ancient prophecies already surrounded him, warning he would someday bring destruction upon Troy itself. Yet despite those warnings, fate moved inevitably forward. Hermes guided the three goddesses to Mount Ida, where Paris tended flocks among quiet hills and forests. There, before mortal man, the most powerful goddesses in existence competed for beauty. The symbolism mattered enormously. Even gods desired validation. Even immortals feared rejection. Hera offered Paris power. If chosen, she promised to make him ruler over vast kingdoms across Europe and Asia. Athena offered wisdom and military glory. She promised victory in battle and unmatched intelligence. But Aphrodite offered something different. Love, or more accurately, the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Sparta. And that offer revealed everything about Aphrodite's nature. The goddess understood desire surpasses logic more often than power or wisdom ever could. Paris chose Aphrodite immediately. Many later Greek thinkers considered that choice deeply symbolic. Human beings consistently choose passion over reason, even when destruction follows. Especially when destruction follows. Aphrodite smiled as Paris handed her the golden apple. From that moment onward, she became protector of Troy, and the road toward catastrophe began. Helen already belonged to another man, Menelaus, king of Sparta. Yet Aphrodite's power over attraction could overwhelm marriages, oaths, even kingdoms themselves. The goddess guided Paris to Sparta, where he encountered Helen for the first time. Greek storytellers describe their meeting almost like divine possession. The moment their eyes met, desire struck instantly. Not ordinary attraction, something stronger, dangerous, overwhelming. Some traditions claimed Aphrodite herself enchanted Helen directly, causing uncontrollable passion for Paris. Others suggested Helen willingly chose desire over duty. The Greeks intentionally left ambiguity there, because humans themselves rarely understand whether love is chosen or inflicted. Helen eventually left Sparta, with Paris sailing toward Troy across dark waters while Aphrodite protected them from storms. Behind them, they left humiliation, betrayal, and outrage. Ahead waited war. Masivava. The Greeks launched a military expedition unlike anything the ancient world had ever seen. Kings united armies from across Greece under oath demanding Helen's return. Thousands of ships crossed the sea. Heroes gathered, and above them, all the gods themselves took sides. Aphrodite supported Troy fiercely throughout the conflict, not because Troy deserved righteousness more than Greece, but because Paris had honored her, and because the war itself represented her influence made manifest. The Greeks saw the Trojan War as proof that desire could reshape civilization. One relationship, one act of passion, and entire nations burned. That frightened them profoundly, because it meant humans never truly control history as much as they imagine. Emotion often rules events more than strategy. Throughout the war, Aphrodite repeatedly intervened to protect Paris despite his weaknesses as a warrior. Unlike Hector or Achilles, Paris lacked heroic discipline and battlefield courage. Many Greeks viewed him almost contemptuously, a man whose desires caused destruction while others paid the price. Yet Aphrodite remained loyal. When Menelaus nearly killed Paris in single combat, Aphrodite rescued the Trojan prince directly from the battlefield, enveloping him in divine mist before carrying him safely away. That moment revealed another uncomfortable Greek truth. Love often protects the undeserving. Passion blinds judgment. Aphrodite herself sometimes appeared irrational because desire itself is irrational. The goddess even manipulated Helen emotionally during the war, forcing confrontations between lovers while soldiers died outside Troy's walls. One famous story described Aphrodite appearing before Helen, disguised as an old woman ordering her to return to Paris's bedchamber after battle. Helen resisted, angrily recognizing the goddess beneath the disguise. According to some versions, Helen even accused Aphrodite directly. "Why don't you go sleep with Paris yourself?" That line shocked ancient audiences because it portrayed a mortal woman speaking boldly against a goddess. Yet Aphrodite's response carried terrifying weight. She threatened Helen, immediately warning divine anger could destroy her completely. The scene demonstrated that Aphrodite's gifts always carried danger. Love offered ecstasy, but also submission, dependency, loss of freedom. Again, the Greeks refused romantic simplicity. Their goddess of love could nurture beauty while simultaneously becoming manipulative and cruel, because passion itself behaves that way sometimes. Meanwhile, Ares also entered the Trojan War, eventually fighting beside the Trojans largely because Aphrodite supported them. Once again, love and war moved together. Ancient poets described Ares charging in a battle, while Aphrodite followed near the conflict, healing wounded warriors she favored. That imagery fascinated Greek audiences deeply. Even amid slaughter, desire survives. Sometimes it even grows stronger. The battlefield became strangely eroticized within portions of Greek literature. Beautiful warriors inspired admiration bordering on romantic obsession. Glory itself became seductive. Achilles especially embodied this dangerous intersection between violence and beauty. Young, nearly invincible, magnificent in combat, desired and admired by both mortals and immortals alike. The Greeks recognized how charisma and destruction often become intertwined. Aphrodite's influence extended far beyond romance alone. She shaped ambition, pride, competition, the longing to possess beauty or be desired by others. In many ways, she represented the force pulling humans constantly toward one another regardless of consequences. And because humans are emotional creatures, her power became nearly universal. Even philosophers wrestling against desire acknowledged how difficult resisting attraction truly is. Plato later developed theories separating physical desire from spiritual love partly, because Aphrodite's mythology already demonstrated how dangerous uncontrolled passion could become. Yet Greek culture never fully condemned desire either. That complexity matters enormously. The Greeks did not believe humans should eliminate passion. Without passion, there would be no poetry, no art, no families, no giddy, no longing for greatness. The problem was excess, imbalance, passion overwhelming wisdom entirely. That was the true lesson hidden beneath Aphrodite's myths. And nowhere did that lesson appear more clearly than Troy itself. For 10 years, the war consumed heroes, cities, families, and futures. Thousands died because of desire. Not merely Paris and Helen's desire. Everyone's desire for glory, revenge, honor, victory, love, immortality through legend. And above the burning city, Aphrodite remained one of the central divine forces guiding events toward inevitable tragedy. Because once desire begins moving history forward, stopping it becomes nearly impossible. The Greeks understood that better than most civilizations ever would, which is why they feared Aphrodite almost as much as they worshipped her. The Greeks did not imagine Aphrodite as gentle. Beautiful, yes. Irresistible, certainly. But gentle? Not always. Modern ideas often reduce her into a harmless goddess of romance and pleasure. Yet ancient worshippers understood something much darker about desire. Love can become obsession. Beauty can inspire violence. Rejection can create hatred strong enough to destroy entire lives. And Aphrodite ruled over all of it. That was why people feared offending her almost as much as they feared angering Zeus himself. Because storms eventually pass, but desire can poison the soul for decades. Again and again, Greek mythology repeated the same warning. No mortal diex Aphrodite safri. One of the clearest examples involved Hippolytus, Prince of Athens. His story became one of the most tragic demonstrations of Aphrodite's terrifying pride. Hippolytus was young, disciplined, and unusually devoted to Artemis, goddess of the hunt. Unlike most men of his age, he rejected romance completely. He avoided women, mocked physical desire, and dedicated himself entirely to hunting, athletic training, and purity. To many Greeks, this behavior already seemed dangerous. Not because chastity itself was evil, but because rejecting one fundamental aspect of human nature entirely always offended the balance valued by Greek religion. And Hippolytus did more than avoid Aphrodite. He openly insulted her. Ancient stories describe him passing her temples without offering prayer or sacrifice. He praised Artemis while dismissing love as weakness and distraction. For a time, Aphrodite watched silently. Then she decided punishment was necessary, not merely for revenge, for demonstration. The goddess of desire understood something Hippolytus did not. No one escapes passion forever. And Aphrodite chose a horrifying way to prove it. Instead of attacking Hippolytus directly, she targeted someone close to him, Phaedra, his stepmother, a noble queen already married to Hippolytus's father, Theseus. Aphrodite infected Phaedra with uncontrollable desire for her stepson. The Greeks described divine passion almost like disease in stories such as this. Phaedra's thoughts became consumed. She stopped eating properly. Sleep vanished. Shame battled constantly against longing inside her mind. And because Greek society considered such desire deeply taboo, the emotional torment became unbearable. Phaedra tried resisting. That mattered greatly to ancient audiences. She was not portrayed as evil. She was trapped. That distinction reflected Greek understanding of Aphrodite's power. Desire often arrives without permission. Eventually, servants discovered the truth, and disaster unfolded rapidly. Hippolytus reacted with horror and disgust upon learning his stepmother's feelings. He rejected her completely, condemning women and desire even more harshly than before. Humiliated and emotionally destroyed, Phaedra took her own life. But before dying, she left accusations claiming Hippolytus had violated her. Theseus believed the lie. Furious, he cursed his own son, invoking Poseidon's wrath. As Hippolytus rode his chariot beside the sea, a monstrous bull erupted from the waves, terrifying the horses. The chariot crashed violently. Hippolytus became tangled in the reins and dragged across rocks until his body shattered. Only afterward did the truth emerge. Too late. Far too late. And behind the entire tragedy stood Aphrodite. Not because she desired random suffering, but because Greek mythology insisted every force in existence demands recognition. Ignoring love completely proved just as dangerous as surrendering entirely to it. That balance remained central to Greek thought. Another terrifying story involved the woman's Psyche, whose beauty became so extraordinary that mortals began comparing her directly to Aphrodite herself. At first, the goddess tolerated the comparisons. Then she grew furious, because beauty formed the foundation of Aphrodite's identity and power. Mortals abandoning her worship for another woman threatened more than vanity. It threatened divine authority itself. Ancient religion depended heavily upon recognition and devotion. Gods weakened symbolically when forgotten. So Aphrodite decided Psyche must suffer. She summoned Eros, ordering her son to strike Psyche with one of his arrows so the girl would fall in love with the most hideous creature imaginable. But the plan failed immediately. Eros accidentally wounded himself instead and became obsessed with Psyche personally. That irony fascinated Greek storytellers. Even the god of love could not fully control desire. Love itself behaves unpredictably. Eventually, Psyche and Eros began a secret relationship, though complicated trials and suffering followed before their eventual reunion. The story evolved later than many older myths and carried different emotional tones, yet Aphrodite's role remained revealing. The goddess repeatedly tested Psyche through impossible tasks, sorting endless grains, gathering deadly wool from violent golden sheep, descending into the underworld itself. Each challenge symbolized suffering connected to love and emotional transformation. Because the Greeks understood genuine love rarely arrives without hardship. Even Aphrodite's blessings demanded sacrifice sometimes. But perhaps the most disturbing examples of Aphrodite's wrath involved women transformed because of beauty, jealousy, or sexual violation. One famous story concerned Mira. According to myth, Mira's mother foolishly boasted her daughter surpassed Aphrodite in beauty. The kind of arrogance, called hubris by the Greeks, almost always invited divine punishment. Aphrodite responded brutally. She cursed Mira with uncontrollable desire for her own father. Again, Greek mythology portrayed forbidden passion not merely as moral failure, but as divine madness capable of destroying identity itself. With assistance from a servant, Mira secretly entered her father's bedchamber at night, disguised in darkness. The relationship continued briefly before the truth emerged. Horrified, her father attempted killing her. The gods eventually transformed Mira into a tree while she fled in terror. From that tree came myrrh resin, sweet-smelling yet bitter. The symbolism struck Greek audiences powerfully. Desire itself can become both intoxicating and poisonous simultaneously. Even natural substances carried mythological reminders of Aphrodite's dangerous domain. The goddess also played major roles in stories involving jealousy between women. Unlike modern simplified versions of beauty culture, Greek mythology often portrayed attractiveness as socially destabilizing. Beauty attracted envy, competition, conflict, and Aphrodite amplified all those emotions. One lesser-known myth described how the goddess punished women who refused participation in her festivals or denied sexuality entirely. In certain regions, sacred rituals connected to Aphrodite involved music, dancing, perfume, flowers, wine, and temporary release from ordinary social restrictions. Women rejecting these celebrations symbolically rejected fertility, attraction, and social harmony itself, according to ancient belief. Punishments varied across myths. Some women became overwhelmed by uncontrollable lust. Others suffered infertility or social isolation. The message remained consistent. Human beings must acknowledge desire rather than pretend transcendence beyond it. This philosophy separated Greek religion sharply from later traditions, emphasizing strict suppression of passion. The Greeks sought balance instead. Too much indulgence caused destruction. Too much denial caused destruction too. Aphrodite existed precisely within that tension. And nowhere did her terrifying complexity appear more clearly than in stories involving mirrors. Mirrors carried deep symbolic connection to Aphrodite throughout the ancient Mediterranean world. Her temples often contained polished bronze mirrors dedicated by worshippers seeking beauty or romantic success. But mirrors also represented vanity, self-obsession, and fragile identity. The Greeks understood beauty fades, that reality haunted them constantly. Aphrodite herself remained eternally perfect because she was divine. Mortals did not possess such protection. Thus, admiration of beauty always carried underlying sadness. Young faces age, bodies weaken, desire changes. Part of Aphrodite's power came from reminding humans how temporary physical perfection truly is. That awareness intensified longing. Many stories described mortals destroyed, trying to preserve youth or possess beauty permanently. Narcissus, though more closely connected to self-love than Aphrodite directly, reflected similar themes. The beautiful youth became obsessed with his own reflection until he wasted away completely. Again, Greek mythology warned against imbalance. Even admiration itself can become fatal. Yet despite all the suffering connected to Aphrodite, the Greeks never viewed her as purely malicious. That complexity matters enormously. She inspired poetry, marriage, birth, art, music, connection between souls. Without Aphrodite, the world would become emotionally empty, cold, sterile. Even philosophers criticizing uncontrolled passion admitted beauty itself often inspires humanity's greatest achievements. Temples dedicated to Aphrodite became some of the most vibrant places in the ancient Mediterranean. Gardens overflowed with roses and myrtle. Incense filled warm evening air while worshippers sang hymns beside torchlight. People came seeking hope there, not merely pleasure. Hope. Hope for affection, companionship, children, healing after heartbreak, courage to confess love, strength to survive rejection. Because despite all its dangers, humans continue pursuing connection endlessly. The Greeks recognized this contradiction beautifully. Love wounds people constantly, yet no one truly wishes to live without it. And standing above all those contradictions remained Aphrodite herself. Radiant, dangerous, desired, feared. The immortal force reminding gods and mortals alike that the heart rarely obeys reason for very long. As Greek civilization expanded across the Mediterranean, so did the worship of Aphrodite. But she did not spread unchanged. Instead, she absorbed older traditions, merging with powerful goddesses that existed long before the Greeks arrived in those regions. This process was not unique to Aphrodite. Ancient religions rarely spread through replacement alone. More often, they evolved through fusion. Gods were compared, merged, reinterpreted, and reshaped by the cultures that adopted them. In the Eastern Mediterranean, Aphrodite encountered one of her most important influences, Astarte, the great Phoenician goddess of love, fertility, and war. Astarte was already worshipped across coastal cities long before Greek sailors arrived. Her temples stood in trading hubs where merchants from many cultures met. She was associated not only with beauty and desire, but also with power, sovereignty, and sometimes even battlefield strength. When Greeks encountered her worship, they recognized familiar patterns immediately. Love, fertility, sexual power, divine femininity, but also something more aggressive and politically charged than their own early versions of Aphrodite. Over time, Astarte's traits blended into Aphrodite's developing identity in certain regions, especially Cyprus and coastal Asia Minor, where cultural exchange was constant. This fusion helped shape Aphrodite into a more complex goddess than a single origin story could explain. Another major influence came from the Mesopotamian goddess Inanna, known later as Ishtar. Ishtar was one of the most powerful deities in the ancient world. Her domains were vast and contradictory: love and war, desire and destruction, fertility and violence, life and death. She embodied extremes rather than balance. Myths of Ishtar often described her descending into the underworld, confronting death itself, and returning transformed. That theme, love existing alongside mortality, echoed later Greek ideas about Aphrodite's dangerous emotional power. Through long centuries of cultural exchange, trade routes, and storytelling, elements of Ishtar's mythology filtered westward and became part of the broader symbolic framework that influenced Aphrodite's image. To the Greeks, these similarities were not contradictions. They were confirmations. Different cultures were simply describing the same fundamental force in different languages. Desire, connection, reproduction, obsession, loss, and joy. Aphrodite gradually became a bridge between worlds, a goddess who belonged not only to Greece, but to the entire Mediterranean imagination. Her worship spread through trade routes as much as through conquest. Sailors carried her symbols across seas. Merchants built shrines in foreign ports. Colonies dedicated entire festivals to her honor. Because wherever humans lived, desire followed. One of the most important centers of Aphrodite's worship became Cyprus, an island deeply associated with her mythic birth from the sea. Cyprus held a unique position in ancient geography. It was a crossroads between Greece, Phoenicia, Egypt, and Asia Minor, a place where languages, goods, and beliefs constantly overlapped. This made it fertile ground for religious synthesis. Archaeological evidence suggests that fertility goddess worship existed in Cyprus long before classical Greek mythology took shape. When Aphrodite's cult arrived, it did not erase those earlier traditions. It absorbed them, reframed them, and gave them a new narrative structure centered around the Greek language and mythological system. The famous sanctuary of Paphos became one of Aphrodite's most important religious centers. Ancient visitors described rituals performed there involving offerings to the sea, processions, music, and sacred spaces where worshippers sought divine favor in matters of love and fertility. For many pilgrims, visiting Cyprus was not just religious. It was transformative. They believed they were stepping closer to the goddess's original presence, closer to the moment when desire itself first entered the world. From Cyprus, Aphrodite's worship expanded further into mainland Greece, particularly into cities where commerce and social interaction were central to daily life. Corinth became one of her most famous sanctuaries, a wealthy trading city where movement, exchange, and interaction defined its identity. Here, Aphrodite was associated strongly with prosperity and social connection. Love and commerce became symbolically intertwined. Desire was not separate from economy. Attraction influenced trade. Relationships influenced wealth. And beauty itself became a kind of currency. In Corinth and other major centers, Aphrodite's temples often stood near busy districts where travelers, merchants, and citizens crossed paths constantly. Her presence reminded people that human connection drives civilization itself. Even economic systems depend on trust, attraction, and persuasion. Meanwhile, in Athens, philosophers began reinterpreting Aphrodite in more abstract terms. They distinguished between different aspects of love. Not all desire was physical. Not all attraction was sexual. Some forms of love elevated the mind instead of the body. This intellectual tradition gave rise to interpretations like Aphrodite Urania, the heavenly aspect of love associated with spiritual beauty and intellectual admiration. Here, Aphrodite became less a figure of physical passion and more a symbol of idealized connection. Love as contemplation, love as appreciation of truth, love as pursuit of beauty beyond the physical world. Yet even in philosophical Athens, Aphrodite Pandemos, the goddess of common, earthly love, remained essential, because philosophers themselves lived in human bodies. And human bodies do not ignore desire simply because logic demands it. This duality became one of the most important features of Aphrodite's identity across Greek thought. She was not one thing. She was many things at once: physical and spiritual, creative and destructive, joyful and painful, orderly and chaotic. That complexity made her universal. Across Greek cities, her festivals reflected this balance. Some celebrations were joyful and public, filled with music, dancing, and communal participation. Others were private and ritualized, focused on fertility, marriage, and personal devotion. Worshippers came to her for many reasons. A young man seeking affection from someone he admired. A woman hoping for children after years of infertility. A sailor praying for safe passage across dangerous seas. A merchant asking for charm in negotiations. A couple seeking reconciliation after conflict. Aphrodite became a goddess of human vulnerability itself, because every request ultimately came from the same place: the desire for connection. But alongside devotion came fear, because the Greeks never forgot what Aphrodite could do when offended. Myths of punishment and obsession served as warnings embedded within culture itself. Love was not safe. It required respect, balance, awareness, and perhaps most importantly, humility. As Greek civilization continued expanding, Aphrodite's image became increasingly tied to Venus, the planet visible in the sky at dawn and dusk. This astronomical connection reinforced her dual nature, appearing at the edges of night and day, neither fully part of darkness nor light, always in transition, always shifting. That symbolism matched her mythological identity perfectly. Aphrodite existed in the space between certainty and uncertainty, between control and surrender, between reason and emotion. Even sailors navigating by stars saw Venus as a guiding presence, a reminder that desire itself can lead travelers across vast, unknown distances. By the later classical period, Aphrodite had become one of the most widely recognized divine figures in the entire Mediterranean world. But her meaning was never fixed. Each city, each culture, each worshiper interpreted her differently. Some saw her as protector of marriage, others as goddess of physical pleasure, others as cosmic force of attraction binding the universe together. And still others feared her as the origin of chaos hidden inside human longing. But all agreed on one thing: she cannot be ignored, because desire itself cannot be ignored. It lives inside every civilization, every household, every human heart. And in Greek imagination, that force always carried the same name: Aphrodite. As Greek thought developed into philosophy, Aphrodite did not fade from importance. Instead, she became more complex, more abstract, less a figure of simple myth, and more a principle embedded in the structure of existence itself. Philosophers began asking questions that myths had already hinted at for centuries. What is desire? Why does beauty move the mind so deeply? Why do humans repeatedly choose emotion over reason, even when they know consequences will follow? And behind all these questions stood Aphrodite, not always as a literal goddess in their arguments, but as the symbolic force representing attraction, longing, and the invisible pull between beings. Even when philosophers tried to move beyond traditional religion, they could not escape her influence. Plato, one of the most important thinkers of the ancient world, explored love in ways that reflected this tension deeply. He recognized that desire begins with the body, but does not necessarily end there. A person may first be drawn to physical beauty, but over time that attraction can transform into admiration for character, intellect, and ultimately truth itself. This progression became one of the most influential ideas in Western philosophy. The concept that love can elevate the human mind, that Aphrodite's power does not only bind people together physically, but can also guide them toward understanding something higher. Yet even in philosophical systems like Plato's, Aphrodite remained present as a necessary starting point. Without attraction, there is no movement toward beauty at all. Without desire, there is no motivation for connection, learning, or creation. The Greeks therefore did not reject Aphrodite in intellectual thought. They reinterpreted her. Meanwhile, artists across the Greek world continued shaping her image in physical form. Sculptors sought to capture beauty itself in marble and bronze, often inspired by her divine form. Statues of Aphrodite became among the most celebrated works in Greek art, not because they represented a specific story, but because they represented an ideal. Perfect proportion, balanced curves, calm expression, a controlled version of beauty that mortals could admire without being overwhelmed by it. Yet even these artistic representations carried tension, because attempting to capture Aphrodite in stone revealed an impossible contradiction. Beauty in myth is alive. It changes. It moves. It inspires desire precisely because it cannot be fully contained. But art freezes it, transforms it into something permanent. That contradiction fascinated Greek artists for centuries. Every statue of Aphrodite was both an offering and a limitation, an attempt to hold what cannot be held. In temples across Greece, these statues stood surrounded by incense, flowers, and offerings from worshippers who believed they were standing in the presence of the goddess herself. Even when everyone understood the statue was not the goddess, the feeling it created was still powerful, because Aphrodite's presence was never only physical. It was emotional, psychological, cultural. She existed wherever desire was felt, and nowhere was this more visible than in the social life of Greek cities. Festivals dedicated to Aphrodite were not only religious ceremonies. They were moments when normal boundaries softened, social roles loosened, and human interaction became more open, expressive, and emotionally charged. Music, dance, perfume, and wine created environments where attraction became more visible. People who normally lived restrained lives experienced brief expansions of emotional freedom. In these moments, Aphrodite was believed to be especially near, not as a distant divine ruler, but as a force moving through human behavior itself. Philosophers sometimes criticize these festivals, warning that excessive indulgence in pleasure could lead to disorder. Yet even critics acknowledged that something essential to human life was expressed in those celebrations. The need for connection, the need to be seen, the need to be desired, the need to desire in return. Greek medicine also connected emotional states to Aphrodite's influence in symbolic ways. Doctors of the ancient world often believed that imbalance in emotions could affect physical health. Too much longing could lead to sleeplessness. Too much grief from lost love could weaken the body. Too much obsession could consume mental stability entirely. In this worldview, Aphrodite was not simply a goddess of pleasure. She was a force that could affect the entire human organism. Mind and body were not separate in Greek thinking. They were deeply connected, and desire was one of the strongest links between them. Even warfare, often associated with Ares, could not be fully separated from Aphrodite's influence in Greek imagination. Soldiers fought not only for survival or strategy, but for honor, loyalty, and emotional bonds to their comrades. Kings motivated armies through promises of glory and admiration. Heroes pursued immortality through fame and remembrance. All of these motivations contained elements of desire. Aphrodite's influence, therefore, extended even into spaces of violence and destruction. Not because she caused war directly, but because she shaped the emotional foundations that made war meaningful to humans. In literature and poetry, this connection became increasingly explicit over time. Epic stories described warriors driven by love of homeland, love of honor, and love of reputation. These forms of love were not romantic, but they were still forms of Aphrodite's domain in a broader sense, because she governed attraction in all its forms, not only between lovers, but between humans and ideals, between individuals and meaning itself. By the later classical period, Aphrodite had become one of the most psychologically rich figures in all Greek mythology. She was no longer just a goddess of origin stories or divine conflict. She had become a mirror for human experience, a way of explaining why people feel what they feel, why beauty matters, why desire persists even when it causes suffering, why connection remains one of the strongest forces in existence, and perhaps most importantly, why humans continue to pursue love even knowing it can hurt them. That paradox remained at the center of her mythology. Aphrodite was not worshipped because she was safe. She was worshipped because she was unavoidable. Every culture that encountered her stories eventually recognized the same truth. Desire is not a choice humans fully control. It is something that arrives, something that moves through them, something that shapes decisions long before reason can intervene. And in Greek imagination, that force had a name. Aphrodite. By the end of the Greek mythological tradition, Aphrodite stood at a strange and powerful position among the gods. She was not the strongest. She did not rule the sky like Zeus. She did not command the sea like Poseidon. She did not govern death or the underworld. And yet, in many ways, she influenced all of them, because no domain of life exists outside desire for very long. Even Zeus himself was often portrayed as vulnerable to Aphrodite's influence, not because she overpowered him, but because even the king of the gods could not exist outside the emotional forces that govern attraction, jealousy, and longing. Greek mythology consistently avoided presenting Aphrodite as subordinate in any simple way. Instead, she functioned as something deeper, a principle embedded inside reality. Wherever life sought connection, she was present. Wherever separation created longing, she was present. Wherever beauty stirred emotion, she was present. And wherever desire caused action, she was already there before the action began. In this sense, Aphrodite was not merely a character in stories. She was the emotional mechanism behind the stories themselves. That is why her myths never resolve cleanly. They always continue. They always repeat. They always echo through new generations of human experience. Even the gods themselves could not escape this cycle. Their loves, rivalries, betrayals, and marriages constantly reshaped Olympus. And every divine conflict mirrored something occurring simultaneously in the mortal world. Greek thinkers eventually recognized that myth was not just entertainment or religious explanation. It was psychology before psychology existed, a way of describing internal human forces using divine language. Aphrodite became the name for everything humans feel when they are pulled towards something or someone beyond reason. Love, desire, obsession, admiration, attachment, longing, and even the pain of separation. Her presence explained why civilization itself is built on unstable emotional foundations. Cities rise not only through strategy and labor, but through cooperation, trust, attraction, and shared hope. Families exist because people choose connection over isolation. Art exists because people want to be seen and remembered. Trade exists because people desire goods, beauty, and comfort. War exists because people desire power, revenge, and honor. And all of these forces intertwine constantly. In Greek imagination, Aphrodite sits at the center of that web, not controlling it like a tyrant, but embodying it like a living principle. That is why her myths remain so enduring. They refuse simplicity. Aphrodite is never only love. She is love in all its forms, beautiful and destructive, creative and destabilizing, comforting and overwhelming. Greek culture did not try to resolve this contradiction. Instead, it preserved it, because it reflected reality too accurately to simplify. Even in death, Aphrodite's influence does not disappear from myth. Her presence continues through her children, her symbols, her cults, her stories, and the emotional patterns she represents. Eros continues striking hearts unpredictably. Phobos continues spreading fear in moments of vulnerability. Harmonia continues representing the fragile possibility of balance. Even the Trojan War, one of the greatest tragedies in Greek storytelling, remains permanently tied to her influence. A reminder that desire can reshape history itself. And across centuries of retelling, Aphrodite's image continued evolving. In some traditions, she remained born from the sea foam of primordial violence. In others, she became the daughter of Zeus, integrated into Olympian order. In others, she became a universal principle of attraction beyond any single genealogy. But all versions agreed on one essential truth. She cannot be removed from the world, because she is not outside it. She is inside it, inside human thought, inside emotion, inside civilization, inside every moment where one being is drawn toward another. That is why her story does not truly end. It continues every time someone feels attraction, every time someone falls in love, every time someone suffers from desire, every time someone creates beauty inspired by longing, and every time history itself bends because of human emotion. Aphrodite remains present, not as a distant myth, but as a living explanation for one of the most powerful truths the Greeks ever understood. That love is not gentle. It is not simple. It is not controllable. It is a force that shapes gods and mortals alike. And once it begins moving through the world, nothing remains unchanged. That is the legacy of Aphrodite, not just the goddess of beauty, but the eternal reminder that desire is the hidden engine of human life itself.